A pair of cracked boots stepped down from a horse into the red dust of Fort Selby spurs, whispering as they met the earth. Heat rolled off the ground like steam from a dying stove, and the sun held its breath in the cloudless noon sky. Elam Cole didn't say a word. He never did in town unless someone forced it from him. But today eyes followed him with unease. Not because of the shotgun on his saddle, not because of the rope across his chest, but because of the woman beside him, young, round-bellied, head down, wrists still faintly red from being bound too tight for too long. She wore no shoes. Her dress hung like curtains torn from a ghost town saloon, and the older woman who'd handed her over counted silver coins with the calmness of one who'd done worse things in better daylight. Elam drawled, the postmaster stepping out from his shade. "That's a girl, not a horse. You sure you know what you're doing?" Elam didn't look at him, didn't pause, just led the girl, no woman, toward his horse, loosened the reins, and let her mount first. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just held her stomach like it was the last thing she owned. Back in the shadows of the saloon, men muttered. The sheriff raised one eyebrow, sipped his drink, and didn't move an inch. As Elam turned his horse toward the southern hills, a breeze picked up. It carried with it the faint scent of sage gun oil and something else, something sharp like change coming fast. Behind him, the mother counted the coins again. Each clink sounded like a nail being driven into something that couldn't be buried. Elam Cole's ranch sat beneath the silver spine of Eagle Ridge, where wild mustangs still thundered across open ground, and silence was worth more than gold. The land stretched wide and lonely, no fence could hold it. No man could tame it, though Elam had tried once long ago. That was before the sickness took Anna, and the fever took May, and the fire took everything else. He built the house again, but never the home. Now he lived alone, spoke only to horses, and rode out at dawn like a man trying to outrun ghosts that never tired. The mustangs came each spring, drawn to the salt lick by the creek. Elam watched them from the porch, hat low, coffee bitter. He knew their movements better than he knew his own heartbeat. There was one stallion, coal-black scar slit down his face. Elam named him Cain. Cain never let another creature too close. Just like Elam. Just like now. The woman slept in the barn that first night, curled against the hay, arms wrapped around her belly like a mother clutching a tombstone. Elam didn't argue. He left her there, laid a folded quilt on a hay bale without a word, and went back inside. On the third morning, he found her by the corral, watching the horses through the rails. Her eyes were green-sharp like broken glass. She looked at him, not away, and asked, "What's this place called?" Elam chewed his pipe stem a while before answering. "Ain't got a name." She didn't say more. Neither did he. Later, while hammering a loose shutter, he saw her touch the saddle on his wall, the one that had belonged to May. She didn't ask whose it was. She just ran her hand across the worn leather like she understood something about loss. That night, he left the barn door open. By the end of the week, she'd moved inside without being told. Ate what he cooked, though barely. Sat near the fire, hands always resting on her stomach. Still no name. Elam didn't press. A man doesn't ask a wound to explain itself. He just stops the bleeding best he can. One evening, the storm broke early. Thunder rolled in, and Cain led the herd down from the hills in a panic. Elam lit the lantern, opened the gate, whistled once. The horses came in wild, churning mud and fear. The woman stepped out, arms wide, whispering something to calm them. And they did. Even Cain stopped, watched her. That was when Elam noticed the way she stood, not frightened, not fragile, but as if she'd faced worse and was still here. He poured 2 cups of coffee that night, set one near her without comment. She took it, sipped, then said softly, "You don't have to pretend I'm not here." He nodded slow. Didn't figure I was. And that was the first real word between them. In that house of ashes and silence, something unseen had begun to stir again, quiet as hoofbeats on soft dirt, slow as a hand learning to unclench. Elam didn't trust it. He didn't name it. But he didn't shut the barn again either. Days passed like drifting smoke, barely visible, hard to catch. The woman kept to the edge of things, never lingering too long in one room, never asking for anything. She folded her blanket each morning and cleaned the dishes even when she didn't eat. Elam noticed the way she moved, careful, measured, like someone waiting for punishment. Her eyes never stayed still. They scanned walls, doorways. At night she twisted in sleep, moaning low, and once she cried out a name. Elam didn't ask whose it was. He just stoked the fire higher and waited for the morning. The child inside her grew restless. She pressed her back against walls when the pain came, panting softly, head thrown back. She never cried out loud. Not once. Elam watched her from the corral, sweat on his brow, torn between stepping close and staying away. Compassion felt like weakness to him, like a door he'd nailed shut years ago, now creaking on its own. One afternoon he brought in an old cradle from the storage shed. May had made it herself back when hope still had breath in their house. He dusted it off, set it beside the hearth, and left without a word. That evening the woman ran her fingers along its side. She didn't thank him, but he heard her humming softly as she sat by it later, threading strips of cloth into a makeshift blanket. A name came 2 days later, but not hers. She was in the kitchen washing an apple when she whispered, "Lisa, that's what I'll call her." Elam didn't reply, didn't ask if that was her name or the baby's. The way she said it, like a memory wrapped in pain, told him all he needed to know. Another week rolled past. Elam found himself talking more, not to her, but near her. He spoke of horses, of fence posts that needed resetting, of the river's change in color. She listened, sometimes smiled, rarely. Her voice came in pieces, short and worn. She liked the smell of tobacco, hated thunder, couldn't read but knew psalm verses by heart. Then one morning she was gone. The porch was empty, her blanket, folded boots missing. Elam's chest tightened, a panic so sharp it stole his breath. He searched the barn, the ridge, the creek. Cain paced the fence line, uneasy. Tracks led west, shallow in the morning dew. He found her in the meadow, kneeling among wild sunflowers. Her dress was wet, eyes swollen. She looked up at him, not ashamed, not afraid, just tired. "Sometimes I gotta walk it out," she said, "else it stays stuck in me." The hurt. He nodded, said nothing, just reached down, offered his hand. She took it. Back at the cabin, he sat on the porch while she dozed inside. His fingers curled around a tin of tobacco he hadn't opened in years. Wind moved across the hills, soft as a lullaby. That night, as lightning flared in the far distance, she finally said, "My name's Ruth." Elam looked at her, just looked, then replied, "Evenin', Ruth." And that was all. No speech, no question, just two people sitting in a room full of old firelight, shadows dancing on the walls, neither knowing quite what they'd become to each other, only that the silence didn't bite like it used to. The wind shifted that night, carried a scent like rain and smoke. Elam knew the smell, knew what followed it. Trouble rode fast in dry country, and it was coming. But he said nothing, just added another log to the fire and watched Ruth sleep with her hand resting on the cradle. It was just after first frost when the riders came down from Cross Tree Mesa. The sky was pinked by dawn, but the light did little to soften their silhouettes, 6 in all, shadow-stiff and rifle-sure. They wore wide-brimmed hats, pulled low dusters that had once been black but now bore the hard color of grave dirt. Their horses moved in silence, disciplined, eyes sharp. At the front rode a man with silver hair plaited at the sides like a war chief, though his badge had long since been stripped. He wore a red bandana knotted at his throat and carried a custom Henry rifle with gold etching down the barrel. They called him Hart Cartwright. Behind him came his sons Red Amos and twins Judd and Job. Big men mean men born of a woman rumored to have died screaming in childbirth. No one ever saw Hart mourn her. He named his gang the Cartwright Sons, and every town they visited seemed to lose something, be it cattle, coin, or kin. They rode up to Fort Selby first, asking after a girl with a scar under her chin, heavy with child, last seen. With a man riding a dark roan with white socks. The sheriff leaned on his cane, said nothing. The storekeep lied. The blacksmith stuttered. All of them afraid. Hart smiled like a man who enjoyed the fear more than the truth. He found a boot Ruth had left behind, kicked under a bench outside the trading post. Turned it over in his hand like a memory. "She ain't far," he said. Back at the ranch, Ruth was different, quieter. her body heavier with child but her face sharper, more alert. She stayed near windows, flinched at every rider passing the ridge. Elam watched the change in her, watched the way she ran her thumb over that small scar on her chin. Finally, one night while patching a torn blanket, she whispered, "They'll come. They always do." Elam didn't press, just waited. She told the story slowly, like blood easing from a wound. Her sister Liza had been promised to Hart Cartwright's son Rhett, a barter arranged by their mother, drunk on debt and desperation. But Liza fought back. She ran. Ruth helped. They were caught. Hart took what he wanted, left Liza broken. The child she carried was Rhett's. Liza never survived the birth. Ruth fled with the baby and hid. Her mother hunted her down and sold her again. Elam, her voice cracked. "They don't want me, they want her." She touched her stomach. The girl. Elam stood still as timber. His eyes had the look of a man remembering something too painful to name. "Then they'll have to take her from my grave." The Cartwright sons reached the ranch on a Tuesday. No warning. Just 6 shapes rising from the dust like vultures come down from the cliffs. Elam saw them first. He didn't shout, just stepped into the barn, checked his rifle, then walked back to the porch like he was expecting an old friend. Ruth stood behind him, shaking. "You don't have to do this." He looked at her. "I do." Hart dismounted, slow, deliberate. His sons stayed on their horses, rifles out. "Mr. Cole," Hart called, "you've got something that don't belong to you." Elam chewed the inside of his cheek. "You looking to die today?" Hart smiled. "Only if it's worth the trade." The first shot came from Job, fast, arrogant. It hit the porch post inches from Elam's head. That was their mistake. Elam dropped to a knee and fired. Job screamed, slumped sideways. Chaos erupted. The air tore with bullets. Splinters flew. Horses screamed. Ruth pulled the baby cradle behind the hearth. She covered her belly with both arms and prayed like she meant to bargain her soul. Cain, the black Mustang, broke through the corral gate in panic. He tore past the barn hooves, striking sparks from stone. The gunfire echoed off the ridge like war drums. Elam took a hit to the shoulder, spun, fell behind a barrel. Blood soaked his shirt, but he kept firing. Amos tried to flank from the creek side. Elam winged him clean in the leg. Amos dropped, howling. Rhett circled wide, got close enough to see Ruth through the window. He shouted her name, but she didn't move. Then Hart kicked in the back door. He moved slow through the house, rifle raised. "Give me the girl, Ruth. I'll leave you be." She stepped forward, arms wide, trembling. "You already killed my sister. You don't get her, daughter." Hart cocked the hammer. "She ain't your kin." Elam came through the smoke, bleeding teeth gritted. "Ain't yours either." He raised his shotgun. Hart turned too late. The blast ripped through his ribs. Hart staggered, dropped. The Henry fell like a curtain torn from its rod, dead before he hit the floor. Outside, the twins had fled. Rhett stood still, shotgun lowered, staring at Ruth. "She's mine," he said quietly. Ruth stepped beside Elam, breath shaking. "Not anymore." Rhett looked at Elam, then at the blood soaking the porch, then back to Ruth. His mouth twisted, but no words came. He turned, mounted, and rode after his brothers. Silence came like a blessing. Elam leaned against the doorframe, blood trailing down his arm. Ruth pressed her hands to his wound. Her face was pale, but her voice steady. "I'll stitch it," she whispered. Outside, Cain circled the house, ears pricked as if to guard what remained. Elam didn't speak. He just let his breath slow the pain settle. In the corner, the cradle rocked gently, untouched by violence, like a whisper from another life. The smoke clung to the rafters long after the last shot faded. Flies came first, then silence, then the crows. Hart Cartwright's body lay face down on the kitchen floor, boots still on his, blood leaking into the floorboards like oil from a rusted can. Ruth had scrubbed for hours, but the stain wouldn't leave. She finally threw the brush aside and sat on the porch steps, hands raw, eyes burning. Elam rested in the chair nearby, shoulder bandaged, skin pale. He hadn't slept. Every hour he rose to check the barn, the door, the fence line. His old rifle leaned against the wall beside him like a loyal dog, its barrel smudged from use. They both knew Rhett would be back. Not with brothers this time. No, he'd be meaner, smarter alone. The night after the shooting, Ruth climbed the ladder to the loft and came down with an old box one Elam hadn't touched in 9 years. Inside were papers, photographs, and a rope neatly coiled. Ruth picked up the photograph first. A little girl, 6 maybe, with a red ribbon in her hair. Elam's daughter, May. Ruth traced the edge of the photo, her lips parted as if to ask, but the question died on her tongue. Elam saw her holding it and turned away. "He died in a fire," Ruth said softly. Elam nodded. "It was my fault. I left a lantern lit in the barn. Came back too late." She didn't press, just said, "You buried them here up on the ridge, oak marker and all." That night they ate beside the fire. No words, just the crackle of kindling and the quiet click of cutlery. When Ruth stood, her hand went to her back and she winced. Elam noticed. "You all right?" She nodded. "It's close. She's coming soon." The wind changed again. The next morning turned sharp eastbound, smelling of pine and ash. The sun rose red and mean. Elam saddled his horse. "I need to ride into Selby, get supplies, maybe warn the sheriff." Ruth didn't argue, just handed him a scrap of cloth. "If I'm gone when you get back, it wasn't by choice." He looked her square in the face. "I won't be long." The ride into town was quiet. The air hung heavy and the horizon danced with heat. Fort Selby was empty when he arrived. Doors shut, windows barred. The sheriff's office was locked. Elam knocked once hard. The door opened a crack. The sheriff's face was haggard. "Heard what happened. Cartwright's boys left town. But Rhett, he stayed behind. Camped near Thorn Gulch. Folk are scared, Elam. That boy's got fire in him." Elam nodded once. "Then he'll come burn us all if I don't end it first." Back at the ranch, the sky bruised purple with clouds. Ruth paced the house. Her pains had grown worse. She bit down on leather straps Elam had left for her, sweat soaking her dress fingers, gripping the edge of the bed. When the contraction eased, she crawled to the door and peered out. That's when she saw him. Rhett Cartwright. Alone. Riding slow, deliberate. He wore a preacher's coat now, and across his saddle horn hung a noose. Ruth staggered to the barn. She hid among the hay breath shallow. Rhett dismounted, walked through the house like he'd built it himself. "Ruth," he called. "We could have done this clean, but you had to let that old fool shoot Pa." She clutched her belly, eyes clenched. The baby stirred. Another contraction hit, this one worse. She cried out, barely stifling it. Rhett turned toward the sound. He found her in the barn, cornered, sweating, shaking. He stepped forward. "I ain't here to hurt you. I just want what's mine." Ruth spat at his boots. "You ain't got nothing that lives." Rhett slapped her. Hard. She hit the ground, eyes dazed, blood on her lip. "That baby carries Cartwright blood. Makes her legacy. Makes her land." Suddenly a crack rang out. Rhett spun, shoulder exploding red. Elam stood in the doorway, smoke curling from his rifle. "I warned your daddy. You get the same." Rhett fell to his knees, clutching his arm. "She's mine," he howled. Elam walked forward, each step slow, boots thudding. "You didn't earn nothing but a rope." He grabbed the noose from Rhett's saddle, threw it over the barn beam. Rhett struggled, but Elam had strength in pain, purpose in grief. He tied the knot with practiced hands. "You want your daddy's legacy, here's his end." But then Ruth shouted, "Stop!" Elam froze. She dragged herself upright. Her voice shook. "Don't let her first breath be born from vengeance." Elam stared at her, then at the rope, at Rhett's bleeding face. He untied the knot. "Leave. Back, it won't be a warning." Rhett limped from the barn, bleeding, defeated. Elam caught Ruth as she collapsed. He carried her inside. The storm broke above them, wind howling, lightning cracking. That night, under thunder and flickering oil light, Ruth gave birth. She screamed, wept, prayed. Elam held her hand and whispered words he hadn't said in a decade. When it was done, the child came tiny, perfect, crying loud. Ruth held her to her chest, crying harder than the child. "She's safe," she whispered. Elam nodded. "And so are you." The fire outside had gone out. The rope lay coiled in the barn, unused. Kane stood guard at the edge of the field, head raised, watching the road. Morning found the ranch wrapped in soft fog. The storm had passed, leaving puddles in the dust and a hush over the land like the world was holding its breath. Inside the cabin, Ruth sat in the rocker, baby wrapped in a quilt stitched from old shirts and hope. Elam moved slowly, his wound stiff but his hands sure as he brewed coffee and stoked the fire. He hadn't spoken much since the birth. Just nodded when Ruth offered a name. Liza, she said again. Same name as before. She wouldn't consider another. Elam said nothing, but something tightened in his chest. Names had power, he knew. And ghosts. Ruth stared at the fire a long time. When she finally spoke, it was quiet, like she was afraid the truth might run if she said it too loud. She ain't mine. Elam turned slowly. What, the baby? She ain't mine. His face didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. She's Liza's, Ruth said. My sister. I told you how she died. I didn't tell you how. Elam leaned against the door frame, waiting. She bled out. After the birth, there was no midwife. Just me, a rusty knife, and a basin too small. She screamed for Mama, then she screamed for me, then she went quiet. Ruth's voice cracked. She never even saw the baby. Elam looked down at the child. So small, so unaware. I buried Liza behind the church in Renville. Took the baby and ran. I couldn't leave her. Mama didn't care. She said, let the Cartwrights take what's theirs. I couldn't. You let me believe. Elam started, then stopped himself. I never said she was mine, Ruth replied. I just didn't correct you. Elam looked out the window. The fog had begun to lift and Cain stood silhouetted in the clearing, wild and watchful. You would have let me hang, Rhett, Elam said. Ruth nodded. Yes, and if I had, you'd have carried it. The words sat heavy in the air. Elam crossed the room, sat across from her. Why tell me now? Because it ain't fair. Ruth whispered, tears in her eyes. To her, or to you? Elam studied her, this woman sold by her mother, hunted by kin, broken by grief but never bowed. She looked like hell and hope stitched into one body. She's yours now, Ruth said, if you want her. The silence grew long. Finally, Elam stood. He reached for the baby, lifted her into his arms. She blinked, yawned, and settled into his chest like she belonged there. I had a daughter once, he murmured. Ruth nodded. I know. Elam sat back down, held the baby close. What was Liza like? Ruth smiled, faint and broken. She laughed when it rained, sang with a voice like velvet. She was softer than me, too soft for this world. And her father, Elam asked, though he already knew. Ruth's jaw tightened. He ain't ever gonna be anything but blood in the dirt. They sat there, two souls held together by silence and a child not born of either. Elam didn't speak again that day. He just held the baby and stared at the fire, letting its warmth seep into places that had been cold too long. That evening he rode out alone, past the corral, past the ridge, up to the grove where May and Anna were buried. He knelt between the markers, set a small stone down between them. No words, just that. When he returned, Ruth was asleep in the rocker, the baby in her arms. He stood in the doorway a while, then walked inside and gently took the child. Rest, he said. Ruth stirred but didn't argue. Elam carried the baby to the cradle, laid her down soft. In the silence he whispered, You're safe now, little one. You're home. And for the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel empty. The seasons turned without permission. Snow came down in sharp curtains, blanketing the land in hush. Elam chopped wood with one good arm, the scar on his shoulder stiffening in the cold. Ruth hung linens inside, now her belly no longer swollen, her body lean again. The baby Liza grew like wildfire in spring, all fists and laughter chasing shadows along the floorboards, her giggles echoing through a house once known only for silence. Ruth stayed, not because she had to, because she chose to. She took to the land as if it had been waiting for her. Planted vegetables, repaired the henhouse, stitched new clothes from old canvas. She never asked for more than the day she was given. Elam built a second cradle, then broke it down and made a crib instead. Cain, the black Mustang, never strayed far. He circled the ranch each dusk like a guardian spirit. Sometimes Elam found hoofprints near the porch in the morning, tracks that began nowhere and ended in the wind. One Sunday, Ruth brought Elam a letter. No return address. The sheriff had left it on his last ride through. It was from a lawyer in Renville. Cartwright estate has fallen, Ruth read aloud. Rhett's dead. Fever got him, land gone to auction, no claims filed. Elam said nothing, just drank his coffee. Later she asked, did we win? He looked at her slow and steady. We survived. That night they lit a lantern and walked the ridge. Elam carried Liza. Ruth brought a smooth stone carved with a name, Liza Grace. They set it beside May's marker. Ruth whispered, now you've got 2 daughters here. Elam didn't correct her. Spring returned early the next year. The Mustangs came down again, Cain in the lead mane like a whip of night. He didn't flinch when Liza toddled toward the fence, tiny hands outstretched. The stallion lowered his head. Their noses nearly touched. Elam watched from the porch. Ruth stood beside him. She's not afraid, she said. She don't have to be, he replied. The Mustang circled once and disappeared into the rising dusk, leaving only hoof prints that would vanish by morning. In time, the child would learn to ride. She'd grow tall like her mother and quiet like her father, or the man who became one when he didn't have to be. And Elam Cole, the man who once spoke only to horses, would be remembered not for his solitude, but for the day he opened his door and found his reason to live again. The wind on the ridge moved through grass and memory alike. Where there had once been ash, now wildflowers grew yellow, stubborn and bright. A cradle sat beneath the window, empty now, rocking gently in the breeze. On the porch, an old man carved a piece of wood into the shape of a Mustang while a child laughed in the distance. No legend was written, but the land remembered. And if you passed by Eagle Ridge on a quiet evening, you might still hear it, the hush of hooves, the whisper of forgiveness. Stories end, but echoes like hoofbeats ride forever. Watch the next tale of redemption and quiet courage. Subscribe to never miss a whisper from the West.